and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about some of the benefits of breathing. And sort of the basis of this episode is an article from The Athletic, which is the sort of the sports website linked with the New York Times. Some of you may remember we interviewed Matthew Futterman, who's a journalist for The Athletic. A little while ago at this point. And this article is not from him, but it's an article sort of general in sports where they talk about some different sports. And the title is "The Science is Clear. Deep breathing can be a game changer for anyone. Elite athletes agree." So in this article, they talk about some of the different benefits of deep breathing. They bring up different elite athletes from some different sports and bring up some of the science around that as well. So I think in this episode, we can talk a little bit about this article, and then also talk about some of the experiences that we've had in terms of working with athletes and some of the different techniques that we generally suggest. Which I think our goal is for there to be some simple and actionable techniques that people can utilize and try to bring to the court with them. And yeah, so we can talk about the article, talk a little bit about the science, and then talk about some of our own experiences, both working with athletes and maybe some experiences that we've had on the court as well.
And before we dive into that head first, Josh, let's take a moment to mention our sponsor, Go Sport. So as a listener of the Tennis IQ podcast, you can get 10% off Go Sport products at gosport.com. So it's GEAU sport.com by using the discount code TennisIQ10. So visit gosport.com and be sure to check out their selection of premium gear bags for tennis and pickleball. Josh and I both use their bags and they are truly fantastic. Again, you can use the discount code TennisIQ10 to get 10% off all products at gosport.com, GEAU sport.com. So Josh, I think this topic about breathing is really important because if we look at some of the basic behaviors that are fundamental to physical and mental performance, we often ignore them. And I think about three kind of big ones, breathing being one of them, our body language, and how we speak to ourselves. And if we think about learning to master ourselves, to take more control of what we do, it's really around those three things. And so we're going to spend some time today, obviously, going through the breathing piece of that. And all three of those things, as I just said, are controllable, but we don't necessarily control them consciously. And the whole idea with understanding the role of breathing is to try to bring conscious control to something that we can control. Because very often in sport and in tennis, things can feel overwhelming. They can feel chaotic. We might be sensing that we're not in control. But the breath always gives us a place to go to where we can exercise that. So this article is very interesting in that I think it looks more, Josh, sort of off court or off field more than anything, although I think there are a couple connections to actual performance, and we'll get into that and how we can do that on the court. But even just quoting something from the article, I'll just read this section in terms of some of the benefits of breathing. So using a regular deep breathing routine can reduce your anxiety, blood pressure, and heart rate while improving your overall mental health. And who wouldn't want that? And it's as simple as focusing on, a deep breathing routine. We can maybe propose some of that, Josh, because I don't know that there's necessarily there are a bunch of techniques that are spoken of in the article, and but it doesn't necessarily give you, say, like, do this for X number of minutes or so forth. There might be one suggestion around that. So, regular breath work can really help us just manage how we're feeling. It can help us get through tough days. It can help us get through a tough practice. It can help us feel more in control, maybe even happier, more productive, more focused. So I think it's a really important topic that as tennis players, can we bring more conscious thought to our breathing? We're going to talk about some breathing patterns today. We're going to talk about breathing between points, probably also discuss a little bit about breathing while playing a point. That's a key thing. And then we can also get into other techniques that people may have heard of that are certainly out there and have been popularized. So, Josh, tell us a little bit about how you incorporate breathing into your work, or comment on the article. I don't want to necessarily push you in one particular direction, but I think we both obviously work on this aspect with clients, and I think this article is actually great to share with clients to give them some more basis on what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think there's a lot to be said in terms of the other side, in terms of how this can be used with athletes and sort of maybe how to best approach it, how to best bring it up. In terms of the article, I found it really interesting. I think they did a good job of briefly explaining some of the science around it in terms of why breathing is beneficial, and we'll link to the article. You do need a subscription. It's The Athletic is connected with the New York Times. If anyone has a New York Times subscription, or there may be other ways, finding it online. But we'll link to it in the show notes so people can check it out. Or if you don't have access, you can Google and try to find some of that same information. But what I liked about the article is that, in addition to the scientific aspects that they brought up, they brought up a lot of examples of pro athletes of different sports. People like Aaron Rodgers and Steph Curry and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and they brought up a story of a minor league baseball player named Harvey Martin who struggled with anxiety and the yips, started using breath work, realized he was chronically breathing through his mouth, sort of focused on this during his career, and ended up, later being hired by the San Francisco Giants as a breathing specialist, and, has benefited the team in that way. And in terms of breathing, and I like that, just kind of it gives a nice rundown in terms of, breathing, which is obviously something, as you said, Brian, it's fundamental. It's something that we do all the time. We need to breathe to live. But I think I would say most people, we're not always as aware of our breath as we could be, and we're not necessarily using it intentionally or deliberately as a tool. And it can be, right? It's something that we have control over at all times, right? When the world is moving in all different, directions, and all these different things are happening, our breath is something that we can always try to utilize, right? Not that it's always easy to do, but it is something that we can have control over and can utilize to our advantage. So I like that they, sort of focused on different pieces here. The sort of a scientific explanation. They brought up different athletes that have used it effectively. They talked about different techniques a bit. They talked about, from Nicholas Tiller, who's a researcher out at the Harbor UCLA Medical Center. He talks about a technique where you breathe in through your nose you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 8 seconds, pursing your lips so you don't exhale too quickly. So they bring up that technique. There are some other techniques that we can bring up as well. One other thing that I liked from the article is actually a comparison that I hadn't thought of before, but I think it makes perfect sense. And essentially they're comparing your nervous system to an automobile. So comparing it to a car, and talking about the sympathetic, your sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight response, is essentially the gas pedal, right? So you're activating that to sort of ramp up. And when you need to have that fight or flight response, when you are in trouble, that's where that sympathetic nervous system comes in. And then for the on the other side, the parasympathetic nervous system is really the brake, where you need to pump the brakes, where you need to slow things down. And that's where we can really use our breathing in order to activate that. And I think there's specific ways where we can do that most effectively, trying to, and we'll talk more about this, but, trying to breathe in through our nose, trying to have a long, slow exhale, are ways that we can help to sort of pump the brakes or activate that parasympathetic nervous system and kind of get us out of that fight or flight mode, and into more something calmer and something where we feel more in control.
So a technique for that, we've mentioned the book Arete by Brian Johnson, and the platform that Brian has started with others called Heroic. They have a technique in that they call this flip the switch. And the idea is kind of flipping the switch on the parasympathetic nervous system to try to calm things down. And it's very simple, tool technique to do. And it involves essentially 4 components that can be looked at through the acronym of BBMA. So body, breath, mind, action. And so the first part of doing this is getting yourself in a good posture. And we talk about that all the time for tennis. Your body language is important. It affects your physiology, your body chemistry. So, standing up tall, shoulders back, head high, chin down. And then the breath part is, as you just said, Josh, it's inhaling slowly. So not like, a quick pulling yourself up. It's a really slow trickle deep into the belly. And then for this technique, the idea is then to exhale for a little bit longer than the inhale. So maybe one. So if you inhaled for 4, you might inhale or exhale for 6. And the point of that is to relax again the body and get the heart rate down so we can think better. And as you do that, then the M comes in, the mental part, the mantra that you want to use. And that mantra is something that's going to help you do whatever is important next to the best of your ability. It could be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be something like, all right, you got this. Stay engaged, keep fighting, everything is practice, compete. Something that really resonates with you, because the A for action is now go do that thing that is most important for whatever it is you're in the moment. So for a match, it might be, all right, be 100% focused on this next point. It might be play your game on this next point, play to win, something like that. So this very simple BBMA, body, breath, mind, action, and the mind part could be a mantra or phrase. It's really key, I think, Josh, and it's using the breath a lot here to flip the switch on the parasympathetic nervous system, to calm us down in a tennis match. There's generally no reason to be in fight or flight. So if we notice that, this is something that you can use very briefly, actually, even between points. Everything we talk to players about with a between point routine most likely involves their body, them taking some breaths, and using their coach's voice to help them focus on what's important now. So simple technique, and for flip the switch, when do you use it? You can use it before you begin something, presentation, before a match, or when something challenging has occurred. Some adversity has popped up. We might even think of that as part of the yellow light routine in a tennis match. Do this, even if it's a couple of breaths, and a lot of it can be done, I think, in parallel. You don't have to do body, then breath, then mind. You can really combine a lot of this, just make it a little bit faster, you get better at it, and then you're ready for what's important next. So I think that was part of the Harvey Martin story that you were mentioning, Josh, that noticing he was a chronic mouth breather, which is generally can be a sign of increased stress and anxiety. And so he learned to do more of this nasal breathing and doing it in a specific way such that he was able to essentially turn on his parasympathetic nervous system or use it as a brake for what he was feeling and to take control. So I just wanted to make that connection to a very specific technique that people can use, flip the switch. Sometimes I call it flip your focus, because it helps bring us again into the present moment and what we want to do.
I really like that. And I think that's definitely something that people can use. And I think that that time between points, and according to the rules, people have, 20 or 25 seconds between points. And, we've talked about using a in between points routine and the 16-second cure from Dr. Jim Lear. And, being able to essentially maximize that time between points to help you put that last point behind you, reset, and get ready for the next point. And a big part of that is using your breath effectively. I often think about, the in terms of the four steps, that second step, which, the first step is more about moving on from that last point, right? Being able to kind of zoom in on it, sort of look at it objectively. Okay, what actually happened in that last point? Let's walk with good body language, kind of like what you said, right? Let's make sure we're walking away from where the point ended with some good body language. And we're really using that first step to move on from that last point. But then that second step is where the breath comes in. The second step is where we do want to be focusing on our breathing. And I think there's different benefits of this that it helps us relax. It can certainly help our body kind of slow down, calm down, relax. And I think it can also really help us be present, right? We want to be in the here and now, in the present moment. I would say often, but especially between points, right? We don't want to be, no matter what, whether we're playing great, whether we're not playing as great, or winning or losing, we don't want to be focused on things from the past, right? Why is the score the way it is, right? I can't believe that my opponent called that shot out 3 points ago. Well, how did I miss that last backhand, right? We don't want to be focused on the past. We don't want to be focusing on the future in terms of what could happen, what might happen. Okay, if I win this next point, then I'm going to be up 5-3 in the set. Or okay, if I'm getting close to winning this match, and then this is who I play next, or okay, I'm down here, and if I lose this match, what's this going to do to my UTR? What are people going to think? Instead of those thoughts of the past or the future, we want to be present, and the breath can really help us with that too. So with that second step in the routine, it can certainly help us relax, but I think it can really help us it can help ground us. It can help bring us into the present moment and, sort of center us into, being right here, right now, so that we can, next focus on whatever comes next, focus on that next point, sort of with that next step in the routine. And we've had episodes where we've talked more about this routine. So I definitely don't need to go into every aspect of it, but I think yeah, I think there's a lot of different benefits to the breath. I think being able to use it between points in that way I think athletes find that really helpful just, for those types of benefits of resetting, relaxing, finding that present, finding that ability to be in the present moment. I think it can be helpful before matches. A lot of athletes like to meditate or they do different breathing exercises. We could talk about the timing to do that, right? Doing a long meditation right before a match, I think for a lot of people is maybe not exactly what's needed and might make them too relaxed or even sleepy. So I think there's, different things can work for different people there. And then also during points, right? And I think you briefly brought this up, but I think there can be a lot of benefit. I think it's necessary to be able to incorporate our breathing as we're playing. And when watching the pros, you see different sorts of approaches here. Some have more of a obvious grunt or a loud exhale that's being used, some don't, but all the pro players are thinking about, trying to use their breath effectively, trying to make sure that they're exhaling as they hit, as they make contact or maybe even slightly before to kind of release that tension as they're playing. And I think probably other people, people who are listening can relate to that in terms of thinking about moments where you are actively using your breath during points and inhaling and then being able to exhale right before contact or during contact, and the difference between holding your breath and maybe not doing that as intentionally or as well to moments where you do it a lot more effectively. But wanted to pause there and wanted to see some of your thoughts. I know I kind of went in a couple different directions there.
Well, I wanted to bring your idea of using breathing during a point back to something in the article.
Yep.
Steph Curry was working on with a coach, a basketball skills coach named Brandon Payne, who and they started doing this in the early 2010s, and he brought the message to Steph Curry that breathing is a skill too. And Curry then started to integrate specific breathing patterns with specific things he was doing on the court. So, for example, a stationary ball handling drill might come with a specific breathing pattern. That made me think about our episode with Dave Bailey on tennis footwork and the notion of marrying footwork to a stroke. So not only are you learning, when you're hitting a forehand, it's not just about take back, contact point, follow through, because if your feet are all messed up and you're off balance, that stuff doesn't really work that well. So he was talking about how the need to know the contact moves for your forehand such that you're not just practicing all the stuff with your arms, but you're also doing the footwork pattern that sets you up. And it's possible that there's a breathing pattern that helps us best on ground strokes. There's a video that I like to share. There's actually two. These guys, Top Tennis Training on YouTube. Two guys, I'm pretty sure they're out of the UK. And I really like a lot of their videos. And they have two on how to breathe while playing. And which I don't think we get a lot of those types of educational pieces on the web with respect to tennis. And there's a ton of stuff, obviously, what to do between points or what to do off court, but how should we be breathing? And, you talk to a lot of players, and they almost involuntarily tell you that they hold their breath while they're playing. And, what's the impact of that? The impact of that is that you are tighter at contact than you need to be, right? There's more tension in your body because you're holding your breath. So with that added tension, you can't create the same kind of power and spin, can't have the same kind of control as you would if your body was more relaxed. So learning the breathing pattern, and I think you briefly mentioned this, Josh, this idea of trying to exhale prior to contact. And that's what the guys at Top Tennis Training talk about. We could perhaps include that link as well in the show notes. And that's something to try. And the way I trained that to begin with was to do it in mini tennis. I love mini tennis as a place to experiment with a lot of these things because the tennis itself is relatively simple because it's a shorter distance. You're hitting the ball more slowly. It's not that complicated for most of us. The complexity gets added as we go further back and further back and further back. And then it gets added, a little bit more complex as we add more speed and spin and so forth. But the idea is if you can start to focus on how to breathe while playing mini tennis and then try to extend that back, further back, further back, further back, and maybe only do that for a few minutes a day. You don't have to do it the entire time. But that will, if you do it every day, it'll start to work its way into how you play. And you may notice being more relaxed at contact, maybe just being more relaxed, focused overall. So I thought that that observation from Steph Curry and his coach Brandon Payne was very good. Can we marry breathing patterns to our performance such that we're doing that and that we're not holding our breath through our shots and we're not grunting necessarily after. I mean, some people grunt. You'll notice that a lot of people, players who do this correctly, the grunt actually begins before contact, not after. Now, of course, there are some great players who have not done it that way. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, but these are things you have to experiment with yourself. I think Rafael Nadal, to me, would be a guy who tended to grunt after the shot more. Novak Djokovic, I think, kind of starts it right before. And you can see the way Novak is. He doesn't look tight, even when he's playing. He looks loose. I would say Nadal sometimes looks a little tight, intense, when he plays. So some stuff to experiment with there. The idea of marrying your breathing to how you're playing.
Yeah, and I think people can reflect on moments where they've been more intentional with that or less intentional with that, and I think yeah, I think a lot of times people do hold their breath, and it takes practice. I love the idea of using it for mini tennis, which is a little bit easier, a little bit more controllable, sort of that nice laboratory for experimentation. There could be a progression where you start with mini tennis, and then you maybe go back to the three-quarters court line, sort of that orange ball line halfway between the service line and baseline, and really make sure you're focused on your breathing with each shot from there. And then from the baseline with sort of casual, relaxed hitting, and then with more intense hitting, and then with a competitive experience like a point game, and then being able to bring that to a set. So I think that's really key. There are a couple of different breathing techniques that I generally introduce to athletes, simple ones that I think can be, I find people latch onto. And two that I will often bring up are box breathing, which is, where you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 4 seconds, you breathe out through your mouth for 4 seconds, then you hold your breath for 4 seconds. That's the first one. And generally, I'll sort of guide people through it twice just so they can experience it without having to worry about remembering the number of seconds or getting themselves to do it or maybe worrying about doing it wrong. So that's the first one, which I think is simple, can definitely help sort of center us, help relax people. The other one is 4-7-8, which is something that's actually used in different military settings, such as the Navy SEALs. And what we do with 4-7-8 is you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and you breathe out through your mouth for 8 seconds. And generally, I'll kind of guide through people through that, twice as well, so they can try it. And people use 4-7-8 in different settings. Some people use it prior to bed because it can certainly be relaxing. And again, with each of these, you can do cycles of it, so it's not just 4-4-4-4 or 4-7-8, but you can do it, multiple times. But yeah, with 4-7-8, it can certainly be relaxing. So before bed can be effective. Potentially prior to a match can be a great time if you're feeling anxious or tense. And I find that people generally gravitate in sort of one way or the other with those couple of exercises. But there's others as well. There's the physiological sigh, which I know has been popularized in recent years by Andrew Huberman and his podcast, which is essentially where you are breathing in through your nose twice, quickly, rapidly, and then letting it all out slowly, almost like a sigh through your mouth. So those are a few, pretty simple exercises that people can use, and you could try to use it at home. You could try to use it before a match, during a match. Between points can be a little tricky, so doing something a little bit shorter, right? If we think about the number of seconds that box breathing takes, 4 4 4 4, that's 16 seconds, or 4 7 8 would be 19 seconds. So that eats up almost all of your time between points. So, instead of doing a full exercise like that, it could be more of, just breathing in through your nose and then slowly breathing out through your mouth between points. But there may be other opportunities, before a match, or even what during a match, probably changeovers could be a great time for this, to try to, utilize some of these breathing exercises and experiment and see what works for you. If you search online, you'll see all different types of um, you know of exercises, in terms of different number of seconds for the inhale and the exhale, right? I mean, the two that I just mentioned, 4 4 4 4 and 4 7 8. I know I mentioned one earlier here from this article, which is 4 4 8. And but you'll see certain overlapping themes where for a lot of them they have a longer exhale than inhale, which which can activate that parasympathetic nervous system. That's one overlap. Not of all of them, right? Box breathing doesn't have that, where it has the same exhale, same number of seconds for the exhale as the inhale. But that's something in common. And for all of them, we're trying to breathe in through our nose. Some of them, people prefer to breathe out through their mouth or out through their nose, but it's always recommended breathing in through our nose. And there's a great book called Breath by Daniel Nestor, where he talks about this, and he talks about how by breathing in through our nose, we essentially are filtering. Our nose has a filtering feature to it where it helps us, filter the air into our body as we're taking it in. So to me, that's a really important piece. And then what happens next? There's, I think, different ways to go about it. And I think by spending the time experimenting and utilizing trial and error and sort of seeing what works for you, you can figure out a breathing technique or a couple of breathing techniques that you find most effective.
But sort of just level set the whole thing because there are a ton of techniques, and this is mentioned in the article. They did some research into what is actually supported through the science and research. And to be honest, maybe they haven't really researched many of these methods in a deep way. But just to quote the article, pretty much every respiratory intervention or product on the market is not supported by science or research except one: deep breathing. So if you even just keep it simple, of slowly inhaling through your nose into your belly and then exhaling, whether it's through your mouth or out through your nose for a little bit longer, you will experience some benefits. I was at a conference in May, and we had somebody who was certified in the Oxygen Advantage technique. So the Oxygen Advantage is a book written by Patrick McKeown. He's an Irish researcher and scientist who had his own issues with asthma and learned certain breathing techniques to deal with that. And it was very interesting, Josh. This basically breath coach walked us through like 60 to 75 minutes of breath work. And what I noticed, because I have a Google Watch that tracks my sleep, heart rate variability, sleep score, etc. That evening, for the entire conference that I was there 9 days, was the highest heart rate variability score that I had and the highest sleep score that I had. And so it just shows you, like, when you actually pay some attention to your breath work, how it can have positive impacts on your physiology, on how you feel. And I think, if we were to interview everybody who was in that room who did that, we all felt a little bit better after doing that extended breath work. Um, so the Oxygen Advantage is another book that you could look at as well. You mentioned the one by Daniel Nestor. Um, some great techniques in there also. Some of it might, some people have probably heard of the, I don't want to call it a craze or a trend, but mouth taping. So, Patrick McGowan is an advocate of that. He's actually produced a mouth tape for people who do have sleep apnea, where there's a little bit of an opening for you to push air out through your mouth if your mouth needs that. So it's kind of interesting. They gave us that. I have not done mouth taping. I'm a little bit not skeptical per se, but maybe just a little bit afraid to do it because I have had some minor sleep apnea over the years, and so I'm like, all right, that's okay. But some of the players I work with, they've done that on their own, and they seem to find some benefit to it. So just as you go through all the research on breathing, know that there are a lot of techniques out there. We haven't even mentioned Wim Hof. Wim Hof has been maybe we did earlier, but that's another one that's very popular these days, and it's a good technique. It's not for everybody, but it's another thing that one can look at, and there's a lot of stuff out there. So yeah, just as you look into breathing, deep breathing, just be aware that the simple foundational practice of slowly inhaling through your nose into your belly and then exhaling out for a little bit longer is going to provide benefit if you can do that for a few minutes per day. I do like to do it before bed, Josh. I think I find that it does help my sleep. I find that it does help my sleep score through my watch and my heart rate variability. Yeah, tends to improve when I do that. So would highly encourage people to begin some sort of deep breathing practice. And, if we go back to atomic habits, tiny habits, start small. Don't commit to something that's too long that you'll never do. Start it nice and small, couple breaths, 1 minute. You can do it.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of good advice there. I mean, I use an Apple Watch, and on the Apple Watch there's a breathe feature as well, which is 1 minute, right? So you can press it. It tells you when to breathe in, when to breathe out. That simple habit of giving yourself 1 minute to focus on your breath, I think, can make a huge difference. And, something like that can be beneficial. I know we've talked about meditation and some of the benefits of that in the past, and really the foundation of meditation tends to be using our breath intentionally, or awareness of breath. And to me, that's where a lot of this starts, right? If we can be aware of our breath and notice times where maybe it speeds up or times where it slows down, and just start there by noticing it. And then maybe, trying to implement a deep breath in certain moments, right? Maybe it's between points when you're tense. Maybe it's going into a break point. Maybe it's in a tiebreaker, right? Then maybe you find it effective, and maybe it's okay, I want to try to use this, more. I want to try to use this between points, every point ideally, or as often as I can as part of my, in between point routine. But yeah, I think that, we don't need to overcomplicate it. And I know we outlined a few different techniques, but as you said, it all is based on that foundation of deep breathing. Um, if you spend a little bit of time Googling, you will find endless different techniques. But and you could try some of them and see what works for you. But I don't think it needs to be overcomplicated. But I think you bring up a really good point in terms of the benefits of 1 minute of focused breathing, or the benefit of doing a meditation for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something along those lines. I think it can help your sleep. I think it can help bring more sort of awareness to yourself and to your surroundings, awareness to your thoughts, awareness of your thoughts, I guess I should say. I think it can have a lot of benefits, and there is now a lot of research also about the benefits of meditation. And you see it again in every major sport. I mean, in tennis, certain people like Novak Djokovic, Iga Swiatek, Bianca Andreescu, they come to mind as people who have really been advocates for it and have spoken out about, some of the benefits that they've observed. But there's a great video that I sometimes show athletes of Phil Jackson and Kobe Bryant, where they talk about meditation and the benefits of breathing. And Phil Jackson was a huge proponent of it, of using meditation. And for those who don't know, he coached the Chicago Bulls, and worked with Michael Jordan and some of the people, some of the other players on their legendary teams, and worked with the Lakers. With Kobe and Shaq, and won plenty of NBA championships. And really, I think a big part of his approach, was incorporating mindfulness and meditation and breathing. And, really in every sport, there are proponents of it. There are true proponents of it, advocates for it, people who are, utilizing these skills, but also, openly talking about it because they see the benefits, and they, recognize that by more athletes utilizing these tools, they can, really gain control of the moment, help themselves relax, and just feel more in control of themselves. And I think, to me, that's a big piece of all of this, right? I think, the breath is something that we always have access to. And, it's something within our control. And I think by trying to use it deliberately to our advantage, we can, really we're able to maximize, that one aspect of our performance, which I think can impact, as you said, your sleep and your heart rate variability and anxiety. And I think, interpersonal relationships in a certain way, when you are more present, more in control, more relaxed, the benefits are truly endless.
So I think today's takeaway, today's action takeaway is to take a moment to focus on your breathing. Maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, see what happens. If you're somebody who already does that, fantastic. If you're someone who has not really paid attention to deep breathing before, try it out. See what happens for yourself. I think this is one of those areas where you want to experiment on yourself to see how you can just improve, just the quality of your life and experience. And then let us know what you think. All right, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.